almost hoped yesterday had been a dream, that I'd leave the Ashmore Inn and find Soraya at her tavern. But when I slid out of bed, I was still wearing the borrowed tunic, and when I pulled on my boots, they were speckled with putrid green blood. I slipped out of the room, my satchel strapped across my chest, more than ready to leave Ashmore. The Guardian wouldn't need to worry that I'd dare more escape attempts from Trio. At least for now, I wanted nothing more than to hide away in my treehouse and nurse my wounded heart. And body. Shades, I hurt. Every step was agony as I descended the staircase to the inn's lobby. My muscles were sore and tender. Bruises were blooming across my skin. I was alive to suffer today. I'd swallow these pains. 17 people could not say the same. Odessa. Kathleen stopped me as I passed the inn's small parlor. Good morning. I gave her a sad smile as she pulled me in for a hug. It was nice to be hugged. Are you all right? She asked, letting me go. I shrugged. You? She shrugged too. You're leaving today. A statement, not a question. She walked to the chair where she'd been sitting, retrieved a book, and handed it over. I brought you this. It's a book on Turin customs. I'll bring more when I see you again. When will that be? Soon. I'll be leaving Ashmore within the week. I have a goodbye to say first, though I don't want to rush it. To the woman you came to visit? Kathleen nodded. Yes. I'm sorry I didn't ask about her yesterday. I'd been preoccupied with digging graves. Is she all right? She's fine. Devastated, like most. But Tura is full of survivors. She'll endure. Like you. She's strong. Like you. I don't feel strong, I said on a breath. Yet you are. Kathleen's eyes softened as she brushed an errant curl off my forehead. Then she took a step backward and pressed both hands over her heart, giving me a slight bow. What does that mean? That gesture? It means I wish you a safe journey, Princess Odessa Wolf. Normally I would have balked at the formal name, but there was something in her voice that gave me pause. Something serious that said I needed to get used to that title, to embrace it. Who was this woman? We'd survived the unthinkable yesterday, and I didn't even know her last name. Maybe it didn't matter. I put my hands over my heart and bowed. Boots thudded across the floor, purposeful, long strides that I was beginning to recognize. The Guardian stopped at my side, his attention on Kathleen. You're leaving. Another statement. Yes. I waited for his hands to cover his heart, but instead he pulled her in for a hug. Wait, he hugged? That seemed so sweet, very unguardian-like. When he let her go, he jerked his chin for me to follow. No sweet for me. Goodbye, Kathleen, I said. Farewell, Odessa. I hoped I'd see her again soon. Life felt fragile at the moment, fleeting. With my book tucked into my satchel, I rushed to catch up to the Guardian. He and his horse waited outside. The stallion's black coat was glossy beneath the morning sun. The Guardian stroked the animal's cheek, murmuring something low. The horse leaned into his touch. It was a lovely day, clear skies and a crisp sweetness in the air. It seemed like a waste. No one here would enjoy it. Certainly not me. People walked with their heads bowed as they hurried down the streets. All happiness had been slaughtered. They should have had a warning. Protection, I said. The Guardian's jaw clenched as he fastened his sword in its scabbard to the saddle. I hadn't meant it as an insult, but I replayed the words. I heard it from his side of the horse. I'd just implied he'd failed these people. I didn't mean from you. And who else would protect them? The king? The crown? Can't Xavier step in? Send some of his rangers to these towns to help? The Guardian's eyes, hazel and angry, met mine. The glare was all I needed to realize I'd crossed a line. A reminder that this princess, this future queen, this Sparrow, was to be seen and not heard. I'm only asking. I think I have that right.
Really?
He arched an eyebrow.
Who gave you that right?
My blood, the moment I signed my name on that treaty, the day Xavier claimed his bride prize. I'm here, I'm in Tura, I have the right just like any other person in this kingdom. This cannot stand. This cannot continue.
And what do you suggest, my queen? What should we do about this? What solution do you propose that Xavier, myself, and all of our rangers have not already considered?
A flood of embarrassment made me draw my shoulders up to my ears, wishing I could be like a turtle and duck my head inside a shell. I didn't have a solution. I didn't know anything about Turin politics. So I kept my mouth shut.
That's what I thought,
he muttered, turning to adjust the stirrup. I want to make a difference, I said. I want to do what's right. I want to help. The Guardian stilled but didn't turn.
Get on the horse, Cross.
I shifted closer to the stallion, hiking up my skirts in an attempt to put my foot in the stirrup. But the animal was too tall and I was too short. I couldn't reach. The Guardian let out a frustrated growl, picked me up by the waist, and plopped me onto the saddle. Thanks. I adjusted my skirts, wishing I had another pair of pants. What about you?
What about me?
What horse will you ride?
Mine.
Oh, hell. He flicked the hems of my skirts.
Move these out of my way.
I balled them up as best I could, the fabric bunching on my lap. Then he swung into the saddle behind me, his thighs hugging my own, his chest pressed against my back as he took up the reins, his arms locking me in place. Without delay, the horse started down the street. The movement forced me deeper into the Guardian's hold. The heat from his body, the scents of leather and spice and wind were inescapable. Damn, how I wished I hated that smell. This ride would be agony, absolute torture. Maybe that was the idea.
Relax,
he ordered. Relaxing meant I'd have to lean against him, sink into that broad chest, melt against his frame. Not a chance. I am relaxed.
Sure you are.
His voice was too close to my ear. A shiver rolled down my spine, and without a doubt, he felt it. Another day, he probably would have teased me for the reaction. Another day, he would have reveled in the way I squirmed. But today was not a day for jokes. Not as we passed the burial grounds outside of town. I took a long look at the tree where we'd laid Soraya to rest, then cast my gaze to the sky, to the twin moons' faint outline. Even battling the sun, they shone white, the color of Arabella's shade. I hoped that Soraya's soul, that all those from Ashmore, had come to rest with the goddess of love. There were those in Calandra who didn't worship the gods. They didn't believe in the Six or their shades. They believed our bodies returned to the earth as dust, that we simply ceased. Then there were those who believed our souls were reborn, that for every life lost, another was created, that somewhere in this realm Soraya's soul was breathing anew. Do you believe in the gods? I asked the Guardian.
Why do you ask?
No man should have survived that fight yesterday. You have powers unlike anything I've ever seen. I guess I wanted to know if you believe the gods gave them to you as gifts. His laugh was low, menacing, a rumble from his body that vibrated against mine.
What you call gifts, I call a curse. Yes, I believe in the gods. I believe they watch us from their precious shades. And I believe they're vindictive, manipulative bastards, intent on tormenting us from their thrones.
Never in my life had I heard a person speak of the gods with such hate, such malice. I wasn't sure what to say to that. It felt like we were inviting trouble, taunting them so.
Any other questions this morning, Sparrow?
I shook my head. We passed the edge of town and set out on the road that would lead us to Trio. A day. That was all I had to endure. Just one day. Except with a tug of the reins, he steered the horse off the road. He turned us away from the forest and toward a range of mountains, its peaks jagged and capped in white. Beneath them looked to be a river valley. We're not going to Trio, are we?
No.
Where are we going?
Elder.
Why? What about my things? What about Brielle and Jocelyn?
Will you always ask so many questions, Cross?
Yes. He sighed.
Xavier.
My stomach twisted. My husband was an elder, and I was being returned to my keeper. All right. I sat tall and rigid, attempting to maintain a fraction of space between our bodies. I didn't let the sinking feeling in my chest weigh me down. This was for the best. I should be with Xavier. We needed more quiet walks, time to be alone. I wasn't certain, but I had the feeling that the Guardian wouldn't stay at the fortress. Not once I'd been locked behind its walls, no longer needing his protection. Which meant after this ride, he'd likely disappear. Good. I needed him to disappear. To go away for weeks, months, and give me time to put my head, my heart back into place. To banish him from my mind. We argued constantly. He was a thorn in my side. The sooner he was gone, the better. The horse's hooves were the only sound as we rode across the landscape. We flowed up and down the hills that surrounded Ashmore, until the town itself was nothing but a memory. My restless night caught up to me by midday, and every few minutes I covered a yawn.
You should rest.
It was the first thing the Guardian had spoken in hours. I'm fine, I lied, righting my shoulders from where they'd slumped.
Sure you are.
I concentrated on the foothills in the distance, forcing my eyes open as the trees slowly grew taller and taller against their mountain backdrop. Every few moments I'd look left, then right, searching for any monsters that might come out of hiding and attack. The pack from yesterday, is that the normal size? I asked.
No, it was larger. Usually bear wolves travel in packs of 3 or 4.
Gods, that pack had been more than double. Was it their number that had made them fearless enough to strike a town? Those people in Ashmore were lucky to have had the Guardian around, to rid this area of that pack. But I had a feeling if I told him that, he'd only scoff. I might blame myself for Soraya, but he blamed himself for all 17 deaths. The hours dragged on, and the heaviness in my eyelids became impossible to fight, until the battle was futile, until somewhere in Tura, curled up against the wrong man, I drifted off to sleep. 32.
Odessa.
The sound of my father's voice startled me from a nightmare. I'd been in the throne room, on my knees, May's knife at my neck. He'd ordered her to kill me. My punishment for returning to Roslo with no information about Alisaria. Beside me on the marble floor, blood seeping from their open throats, were Brielle and Jocelyn. I shook the mental image away, blinking clear the fog of sleep as I took in my surroundings. The early light of dawn colored the sky. I'd slept all night against the Guardian's chest. He'd stopped us atop a steep rise. He sat motionless behind me, his horse unmoving beneath. There was a cliff beside us, its jagged rocks dropping to a raging river, The water crashed as it traveled, and for a moment I closed my eyes and just let myself listen. I pretended that noise was ocean waves and I was on my cliffside in Roslo. Something stirred in my chest as I took in the view. A sense of wonder, peace. It might not be my special place, but there was so much beauty here it was hard to comprehend it all. On the other side of the river was an endless forest, thick and green. It filled the space between us and the looming indigo mountains with their pristine, snow-capped peaks. The colors were so vibrant it was like stepping into a dream.
When I was a boy, my mother brought me here for the first time. She made me sit beside her for an hour, even though all I wanted to do was chase around and hunt for berries. At the time, it felt like a punishment. Now I see what she was trying to do. It was one of those lessons I couldn't appreciate until I got older.
He'd only mentioned his mother once before. What about his father? Did he have siblings? It was an odd feeling to know this man, yet know nothing about him. I knew his expressions. I knew the way he moved. I knew how the air charged when he was angry and the realm blurred when he was close. He was fiercely loyal to his people. He loved his kingdom. He was strong and unbreakable, but gentleness could emerge from that hard exterior. In the way he hugged Catelyn, how he acted with Evangeline, even the affection he showed his horse. But I didn't know if his mother was alive. I didn't know about his family or his education or his childhood home. I didn't know if he'd been born with these powers, these gifts, or if he'd been cursed by a spiteful god. It bothered me more than it should that at best I could only consider him an acquaintance. The guardian stared into the distance, his eyes a different shade of green. This was a new color. Not the vivid emerald I'd seen countless times when he was in a mood to tease me mercilessly. No, this was a deep shade of hunter, the color of Turin forests. It's beautiful. The forest. Those eyes. He dropped his gaze, meeting mine. I was still cradled against him, having shifted in my sleep toward the arm he'd curled around my shoulders. I should move, sit straight, get off this horse and put some distance between us. But the truth I was terrified to admit, even to myself, was that I didn't want to move. Until he tossed me out of the saddle, I was going nowhere. His expression was open and unguarded, utterly consuming, more magnificent than even this Turin scene. He searched my eyes the way I searched his, for answers, salvation, mercy. There was a tether between us. God save us when it snapped. Why couldn't I feel this way for the man who'd claimed me? Our mouths were too close. All it would take was a shift and we'd collide. We'd crash into each other and the shock waves would destroy us both. I needed him to say something mean, to strike a nerve, to bruise my heart. I needed him to hurt me so thoroughly I'd never forgive him. I hate you. It should have broken the moment. It should have pissed him off. But he stared at me like I was something to behold, something to cherish, something to protect.
Yes, you do,
he said.
Don't forget.
Never. There was no such thing as forgetting a man like the Guardian. Not for me. Still, once we reached Elder, I would try.
We must go.
I nodded, sitting tall. Then I took one last look beyond the cliff. Thank you for bringing me here.
You're welcome, my queen.
We didn't speak for the rest of the long journey. not even as we ate dried fruit and nuts and meat, sharing water from a canteen. The trail through the forest was thick. Rain from a recent storm clung to the branches, and whenever a limb skimmed my dress, water would soak into the material. Night was falling, and beneath the trees it was becoming difficult to see the narrow path ahead. A howl rang out from somewhere in the woods, making me tense. The guardian didn't so much as flinch. By the time we reached the fortress, I was wet and cold. Part of me was glad to be here, to get off this horse. The other part wasn't ready for this ride to be over. Torches mounted on the fortress's walls burned bright against the dark. The walls stood as tall as the surrounding trees, rising so high that no monster could scale their face. There were hundreds and hundreds of logs, each stripped of their bark to form a smooth barricade. It stretched so far I couldn't see where either side ended in the darkness. The guardian stopped his horse outside the gates and fitted 2 fingers to his lips, letting out a piercing whistle, different from those I'd heard in Trio.
"Open the gates!"
a man shouted from the ramparts above. The hinges groaned as the men hauled the heavy wood open, swinging the double doors for us to ride inside. As soon as we were beyond the threshold, the soldiers closed us in. The courtyard was alight with fires, burning hot in small basins. Men dressed in grizzer leather, similar to the guardian, all nodded and dipped their heads as we came to a stop. Whispers filled the air as he dismounted. "That's the guardian. He's here. The guardian.
The guardian.
The guardian." Did he not come to Elder often? The wide eyes and open stares answered my question. A young boy ran up to him, taking the horse's reins.
"See that he gets plenty of water and food,"
the guardian said.
"He doesn't like sharing a stall with other horses." "I'll put him in his own, sir." "Good."
He clapped the boy on the shoulder, then came to my side, holding out a hand to help me down. I tried to slide out of the saddle gracefully, but after yesterday's fall and a day spent riding, my legs didn't cooperate. I crashed into his chest as I tipped off the side. He caught me at the waist and set me down, holding on for a moment until I was steady. Then, while he unlatched his saddlebags, I smoothed down my skirts and adjusted the strap on my satchel, busying my hands as the people around us continued to stare and whisper. "Who is she?
"Do you know her?"
Who's that riding with the guardian?" He flung his saddlebags over his shoulder, then clamped a hand over my wrist, pulling me along as he walked out of the courtyard and toward a road that seemed to split the town inside the walls in half. Streets were organized much like Ashmore in straight lines and orderly rows, except there were holes down the center of every lane, holes as wide as my waist that looked to be as deep as I was tall. "What are those?" I asked.
"For the migration. We put wooden spikes in each, crowding the street so it's difficult for a crux to land. Once they're dug, workers will start on the spikes. They'll be buried as deep as they are tall, just like the exterior walls."
Ah, another deterrent for the monsters. Another way the Turins protected themselves. The buildings all had wooden roofs, but there were some with metal spikes that stuck up at all angles, likely other measures to protect against the crux. Golden light spilled from windows, but we moved so quickly I didn't have a chance to see inside.
"You can explore tomorrow,"
he said.
"Think you can manage to stay within the fortress's wall?"
I couldn't make that promise. I didn't want to lie. So I stole Xavier's tactic and stayed quiet. The guardian grumbled under his breath. We passed 3 side streets before we finally turned off the main road. He didn't let go of my wrist as he marched us to a wide house with a square front. It was a simple building, and like the others we'd passed, its exterior was covered with rich russet boards. Every window was dark, the house either empty or asleep. A walkway ran the length of the second floor. The homes in Tura seemed to be built for function, not flash. The only thing extravagant about this one was the front door. Inlaid into the wooden face was a carving of a wolf, the Turin emblem. This was Xavier's house. The guardian let go of my wrist as he led me to a staircase that curved around the building's corner, leading up to the walkway. I kept my hand on the railing as we climbed, my heart inching into my throat with every stair. Was Xavier up here? Were these his quarters? Was I being delivered to my husband's bedroom? The Guardian's boots thudded along the walkway's boards, the rhythm matching the beat of my pounding heart as he walked to the single door and turned the knob. I stayed outside, hands still clutched to the railing, as he went inside and lit a lantern, then another. Well, if Xavier was in there, the Guardian wouldn't have simply barged in. So I pried my hand off the railing and walked through the door. It looked to be a private suite. The sitting room had 2 brown leather chairs bracketing a fireplace. They sat atop a rug woven with bold colors, burgundy, chocolate, and pine green. The Guardian was crouched beside the hearth, striking a flint box to get a fire going. Beyond the sitting area, through an open doorway, a large bed sat covered in a thick taupe quilt and plush pillows. And against the wall, lined in neat rows with the lids propped open, were my trunks. Most held my glasses. One had a glass jar of my hair dye on top. When had he sent for those? I'm not going back to Trio, am I?
No.
The fire crackled to life, and he stood, brushing his palms clean. My heart sank, missing that little treehouse already. What about Brielle and Jocelyn?
They'll stay at the encampment for now.
Was that my punishment for Ashmore? That we'd be separated, like children who'd been caught causing trouble?
Get some rest,
he said, walking past me for the door. Guardian. I grabbed his wrist, my grip firm on the leather cuff that molded to his forearm. His hand fisted, but he didn't pull away.
What?
I don't know. I wasn't ready to be alone. I wasn't ready for him to leave. Once he stepped out that door, I was going to have to let him go. And I wasn't ready. His free hand touched my arm in the exact place where he'd grabbed me yesterday outside the tavern, and I winced.
I'm sorry.
You didn't hurt me. Yes, it was tender today. My entire body was sore. But there were no marks, no bruises from his grip.
Maybe not.
The sadness in his green eyes cracked my heart.
But I could have.
Was that why he'd gotten drunk last night? Because he'd lost control? Because I could have been a victim of his rage? His gaze shifted to my nose like he was counting the freckles dusted across its bridge. His hand lifted to a curl at my temple, tracing the spiral with a fingertip.
You don't have to hide who you are, Cross. Not here.
Not in Tura. Not with him. The Guardian opened his mouth like he was about to say something. But then he must have changed his mind. He eased out of my grip and before I could blink, disappeared into the night. I gave myself a few moments to breathe, to close my eyes and savor the scent of him lingering in the air. It would be gone by morning, and if I had to guess, so would he. It was for the best. It was better this way. I repeated those lies over and over and over as I unpacked my trunks, as I settled into this new home, as I emptied my jar of hair dye out the bedroom window. 33. The knocking on my front door wasn't really a knock, but a constant stream of taps. I'm coming, I laughed as I walked out of my bedroom. The knocking continued. And with it, my day would begin, just as it had every morning for the past week since I'd arrived in Elder. The moment I opened the door, my visitor streaked inside, racing into the sitting room to launch herself into a chair. Good morning, Evie, she giggled as she pushed her dark hair out of her face. Want to play hide and seek? After yesterday, not even a little bit, I said, closing the door. The rules we'd established for the game should have been easy to follow. She was allowed to hide anywhere in my suite or her house while I counted to 50. Except she'd changed the rules during our third game and snuck out to the gardens to play with a litter of baby kittens. I'd spent nearly an hour searching for her, turning this place inside out. Then I'd had a panic attack because I'd lost Xavier's child. When I'd frantically told Luella that I'd lost Evangeline, she'd frowned and helped me search. We'd found her 10 minutes later, sitting between the rows of carrots with 5 balls of white and gray fur. I was never playing hide-and-seek again.
Then what are we going to do?
She kicked her legs, her boots smacking against the chair's side. What if we explored? She sat up straighter.
Explore where?
I don't know, I shrugged. Elder? Maybe you could show me around? I'd spent a week hiding from the world, either in this suite or Xavier's rooms on the first floor. Hiding and punishing myself. For Ashmore, for abandoning Brielle and Jocelyn, for the Guardian. Each morning, Evie would come to visit. The first day, Luella had joined her to say hello. After Evie had invited herself inside the suite, she'd also invited me to become her newest playtime companion. Luella didn't seem to mind having a few hours to herself each morning, and I'd needed Evie's knocking like I'd needed Arthy's hugs when I lived in Roslow. She was filling the hole in my heart, the place where I'd always kept family. This girl's smile had become the best part of my day. Returning her to Luella for lunch and afternoon lessons was the worst. With nothing else to do, I'd slink upstairs to the suite. I'd read Kathleen's book, practice with my knives, and sketch my version of a Turin map in my journal. When I finished, I'd stare at the ceiling and dwell on my mistakes. The pity party was over. I wasn't quite sure where I fit in yet at the fortress. It was time to find out. I had a feeling I'd be an elder for a while.
Let's go.
Evie jumped off the chair and ran for the door, snagging my hand as she passed. Then she pulled me outside to the walkway, leading me to the staircase. It had been too dark the night the Guardian brought me here to appreciate the size of Xavier's house. It took up nearly an entire block. Most of the home was allocated to Evangeline and Luella, but it also included kitchens, laundry, and quarters for Evie's nanny and the other staff. My suite upstairs was more room than I needed. I had the sitting room and a dining area. There was my bedroom, plus a spare. There was even a washroom, complete with a pitcher pump to fill the tub. The water wasn't hot, but I'd add a few boiling kettles, and it was divine. But my favorite part of this suite was the private balcony. From my perch on the second floor, I could see the main road that split Elder down the middle, and I'd watch people come and go. There was a bakery across the street, and the owner brought his wife fresh flowers from the center market every morning. A teenage girl worked at a corner cafe, and so far she seemed to be the only person who noticed me watching. If she saw me sitting outside, she'd give me a tiny wave. I'd wave back. Every other afternoon, a young man carried a stack of papers from building to building. Elder did have a paperman. He printed only Fortress news, but when the paper arrived at my doorstep, I devoured every word. Soldiers wandered up and down the streets, nodding and greeting those they passed on their way to and from the courtyard. From what I could tell, their shifts at the wall changed 3 times a day. Each day, more wooden spikes were installed along the streets, their tips pointed and sharp. Elder was home to merchants and traders, teachers and nurses, families with children of all ages, and that massive wall and its soldiers kept them all safe. It kept Evie safe. From everything but trouble of her own making. 5 days ago, she'd escaped Luella's watchful eyes and snuck to the house kitchen, where she'd stolen a handful of tarts to eat instead of her regular lunch. She'd gotten sick all over her bed. The day after that, she'd accidentally painted flowers on her armoire. The day after that, she'd borrowed a tin of rouge from Luella's vanity and smudged it all over her cheeks. I'd never fallen in love with a person so fast. It made the sting of being dumped here hurt a little less. She'd been dumped here too. Xavier had left Elder not long after relocating his daughter here from Trio, and the Guardian had left the same night he'd delivered me to my suite. Should we tell Luella that we're going to explore? I waved to the carved front door.
She's not in there. She made me promise to stay with you until she was done in the dungeons.
Elder has dungeons? Why would Luella be visiting dungeons? In Quintus, criminals were kept in a camp close to the Evan Ravine, though there were cells at the barracks where Banner's soldiers could keep them before they were transported to the camp. I guess in Tura, criminals were kept in fortress dungeons.
Yes, and they're creepy.
Evie's face lit up.
Let's go there.
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Her smile morphed into a pout. It was adorable. Too adorable. She wielded that pout like a sword.
There's all these books and scrolls and weird stuff. Luella calls them trinkets.
Wait, there are books in the dungeons?
Yup.
She nodded, pulling me closer so she could whisper in my ear.
She doesn't know that I know about it, but I do.
Luella must be hiding them so that Ramsay's soldiers couldn't burn her books. Show me.
Yes!
Evie pumped an arm in the air, then tore off down the street. Hey, wait up! I laughed, jogging to keep up as she ran for the main road. Evangeline checked over her shoulder every now and again, making sure I was still behind her. Each time her smile would widen, her bright eyes sparkling, the blue starbursts as bold as the sky above. Blue, the eye color from Ozarth's land. Why would Xavier, a crown prince, not ensure his child was born on Turin soil so she'd have green starbursts? Maybe her mother had insisted she be born in Ozarth. When Xavier and I had children someday, how would Evie fit into the mix? Xavier didn't want her to be a part of royal life, but at some point, we'd be expected to produce an heir. Was he going to hide all of his children? Or just his daughters? It felt like there was a set of scales in my mind. On one side, questions, the other, answers. The question side was so heavy that they were spilling over. The answer side was all but empty. And I had a hunch I wasn't going to learn much locked away in this fortress. As Kathleen had promised, Elder was built against the mountains. Cliffs rose up before us in sheets of smooth gray rock. It reminded me of the second campsite, where we'd slept on the dirt and nearly been attacked by a grizzer. It might be possible to scale the cliffs, to climb out of Elder, but I certainly had no desire to try. A fall from those rocks would mean a quick death. I hadn't tried to leave through the front gate. I doubted the guards would let me. Maybe this dungeon would prove useful. Evie slowed to a walk, waiting until I caught up. Then she took my hand, holding it as we walked down the center of the main road, taking in buildings and homes and the trees and small gardens planted in between. The barracks started in the heart of Elder, about halfway from the mountains to the fortress's wall. The units were simple cabins arranged in neat, uniform rows. If they were anything like the barracks for Banner's soldiers in Quintus, it wouldn't be more than a bedroom and bath. Meals were likely served in a communal hall for the soldiers. Evie led me all the way to the mountain, then turned and walked along the cliffs, her other hand constantly reaching out to tickle the rocks. Ahead, the timber wall met stone. The logs seemed to have been carved and molded to fit the surface, not leaving so much as a gap to squeeze through, making the only way in and out of Elder the monitored gates. Evie slowed, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd gotten lost. But then an opening in the rock appeared, its angle such that unless you were standing right in front of it, you'd never know it was here. The dungeons are a cave? I asked her.
Yes, I told you it was creepy.
She ducked inside without hesitation, so I followed her into the darkness, giving my eyes a moment to adjust.
Come on, Des.
She slipped her hand in mine, holding tight. A few nights ago, Luella had invited me to eat dinner with them in the main house, and Evie had talked through the entire meal, only eating when Luella would remind her that her flatbread and chicken were getting cold. She'd asked if I had a nickname, and so I'd given her the name Father used sparingly. Evie hadn't called me anything but Des since. We walked along the slanting floor, descending deeper through the tunnel. The rocks were smooth, the occasional step dropping us lower. The ceiling was taller than I'd imagined, farther up than I could reach, even on the tips of my toes. The light from outside was fading too fast. Evie, maybe we should turn back before it's too dark.
No, keep going.
No sooner than she'd insisted, an orange glow flickered ahead. It grew and grew until we passed a lantern hung from a hook in the wall. Beside it was an empty cell. Its iron bars were secured in the rock, but the door was open and unlocked. Dungeons without prisoners.
The bad guys go to the jail by the side gate, she said, reading my thoughts. I can't go there.
No, you cannot.
This is Luella's secret spot now.
She lowered her voice like she was afraid of being caught by her governess.
It's where she hides her special books.
My heart leaped. And what exactly was in those special books? Hopefully more than just readers and lesson books for Evie. The tunnels were damp, trickling water tinkling in the distance. Not exactly where I'd choose to keep books, but it was the last place I'd think to look for any if I were a soldier charged with burning books on the king's order. We kept walking, moving from one lantern's glow to the next, until Evie pressed a finger to her lips and began to tiptoe. At the next cell we came to, she slowed, pointing past the bars. There were no shelves inside, just stacks of books with objects piled on top. There were carved figurines of the gods, medallions with various emblems, trinkets, as Evie had promised. Her hand clasped around my thumb as she pulled me forward to the next cell. Like the last, there were no shelves, but an empty cot was pushed against the back wall, and on its surface were piles of rolled scrolls. Please let one of those be a map. I'd need a day to go through them all. I'd have to come back without Evie, when Luella wasn't here. But for the first time in a week, a spark of hope burned to life. Maybe there was a chance at finding information after all, even if it was trapped behind Elder's walls. Evie kept pulling and I kept following past 3 more cells, these all empty. There were puddles of water on the floor formed from the weeping rock. The tunnel continued on, cell after cell, except before we could continue, a throat cleared. Evie and I both gasped as we spun around, finding a woman at our backs.
"What are you doing here, Evangeline?" Luella asked. "You said you were playing hide-and-seek with Odessa."
"It's my fault," I said. "I wanted to explore Elder a bit today. I'm sorry."
"And you chose the dungeons?"
Luella could give Margot a run for her money on withering looks. Evie's frame slumped. "Sorry." Luella shook her head but let out an exasperated laugh.
"How long have you known about the dungeons?"
Evie shrugged. "I don't know."
"I suppose I should have expected you to follow me here eventually."
Does that mean I'm in trouble?
Evie asked.
Or not in trouble?
"Not in trouble."
Luella crouched in front of her, tucking a lock of dark hair behind the girl's ear.
"But I don't want you coming here without an adult. Understood?"
Understood.
Evie gave her a sure nod.
Can we keep exploring?
"Oh, I love exploring."
The woman's voice that came from behind Luella was familiar. "Kathleen." I smiled as she walked our way, her chestnut eyes dancing in the lantern's light.
"Hello, my dear."
She hugged me tight, then bent to drop a kiss on Evie's hair.
"My darling, have you been tormenting Luella today?" "No more than usual."
Luella stood, giving Kathleen a once-over, head to toe. Relief softened her gaze when she saw the librarian was unscathed.
"I have a few additions to your collection."
Kathleen opened the satchel hung over her shoulder, pulling out 3 leather-bound books. She handed them to Luella, then gave her a quick hug.
"Hello, my friend." "Hello," Luella said. "I'm glad you're here and safe. I heard about Ashmore. Besides the attack, how did it go?"
She must mean with Kathleen's lover?
"I'll tell you about it later."
Kathleen put her hand on my shoulder.
"Did you read that book I gave you?"
"I did, thank you. It was incredibly helpful." Some of the Turin customs the book described I'd learned about in my time here. The various leathers taken from monsters to use in crafting armor or clothing, the way encampments and towns were built into natural barriers for protection, the pony riders who delivered the post. But otherwise, the book had been a wealth of knowledge. I'd known that the Turin economy depended on lumber production, but I hadn't realized that their blacksmiths and forges were some of the best across Calandra. The raw metal they imported across the border they shared with Ozarth wasn't only used for weapons, but for tools like axes and saw blades. They were excellent horsemen, learning to ride at an early age. Young adults often went on hunts when they came of age, killing a barrow wolf or Tarkin as a rite of passage. And the women were trained, like the men, to fight and use weapons too.
"If you've finished that book, let's find you others."
Kathleen waved me into a nearby cell, bending at the waist as she ran her fingers over spines. By the time we left that cell and the next, I had a stack of 5 books to read. She'd picked a few on Calandran history, another on the animals and monsters of Tura, and a book on the Crux and what we knew about their migrations. It was the thinnest of the 5.
One more,
Kathleen said, plucking a red book from the shelf with a matching leather strap wrapped around its cover.
This one is full of old myths and legends, and it has my favorite myth of all.
What's that? I asked.
It's about a woman named Sora who sailed across the horizon. She was gone for 100 years, but when she returned to Calandra, she brought with her creatures and animals our realm had never seen. Some believe that is where our monsters came from. Not the new gods, but a god we've never known, a god more powerful than any other. It always made me wonder, what other stories are out there? What if some are true? What if we've burned too many books?
I had the overwhelming urge to sign the 8. It was just a story, but a twang of fear pinched at my ribs like this was not a topic we should be discussing, like we were courting disfavor with the gods. Part of me wanted to leave this book behind, to skip it altogether. The other wondered what else it might contain. Was there a story in this book about the Chain of Sevens? Was that how the Turns had known they could claim a bride prize? Had Xavier read this book?
You'll love it. It's a favorite.
Kathleen looked at the stack she'd pulled for me and gave an exaggerated frown.
I might have gotten carried away. The king hasn't discovered this hideaway yet. I'm certain when he does, all of these will go. It feels urgent, in a way, to absorb it all while we have the chance.
Why is he burning books? I asked.
Odessa.
Luella appeared at my side, her hand resting softly on my wrist.
Would you mind escorting Evie to the house? She's loaded her pockets with trinkets to put in her room. I'm afraid if she stays any longer, we won't be able to cart it all back. I'll blow out the lanterns and be right behind you.
So much for getting a straight answer on why King Ramsay was burning books. Of course. I smiled at both women, then retreated down the tunnel in search of Evangeline, finding her in the cell with the scrolls. The pockets of her simple dress were stuffed. She stood at the bars, a finger to her lips as she pointed down the hall at Luella. This girl, she was a better spy than I'd ever be. I slipped into the stall, pressing my back against the wall beside her. Then I listened to the whispering voices that carried farther than their owners must have realized.
What do you think you're doing? Luella hissed.
What do you mean?
Don't play coy with me, Kathleen. I've known you my entire life. You're up to something. They're books, Lou. I'm giving that poor girl something to read, that's all. That's all? She's the last person who should be here.
Luella snarled.
I should have known Evie would follow me. That girl. She's too much like her mother, Kathleen said.
Luella sighed.
If he finds out, there will be hell to pay. And I've paid enough.
He? Did she mean Ramsay? Or Xavier? Would Luella be punished if Xavier learned his daughter had been down here? Their voices dropped too low to make out the rest of their conversation. Evie must have realized our eavesdropping was over too, because she grabbed my free hand and led me out of the cell. We walked out of the tunnels and into daylight, but I might as well have stayed in the dark. That's where I seem to be stuck these days. Constantly questioning, constantly guessing about the king and these books, about Xavier and the Guardian, about Lysa and the sick monsters. At the cave's entrance, Evie peered past the rock outcropping, making sure we were alone. Then she darted to the nearest row of barracks, settling into an easy pace, like we were just out for a morning stroll. Yep, she was a tiny spy.
Want to play with the kittens?
She asked when we'd made our way back to my suite to drop off the books. What about your lessons? She stuck out her tongue. Well, Luella wasn't here, so why not? Kittens it is.
Okay,
she said brightly. The girl was only 4 and she could read and write. Xavier might not want her to be a princess, but he was preparing her for it nonetheless. May and I had had the same rigid structure with lessons when we were her age. When we made it to the garden, Evie went straight to the pen where the kittens were napping. She gave them each a snuggle, then plopped on the ground and started taking trinkets from her pockets.
This is Farius.
The golden figurine of the god of mischief's head glinted in the sun.
He's my favorite god.
Why does that not surprise me? I muttered. You're not supposed to have a favorite god. She shrugged and kissed the figurine's bald head.
That's what Papa says.
And maybe someday you'll listen to me.
The baritone voice startled us both.
Papa?
Evie's attention flew to the doorway where Xavier stood, a smile on his lips.
Papa!
She nearly tripped as she ran for him, but he caught her before she could crash, sweeping her into a hug as she wrapped herself around his body.
I've missed you.
He kissed her hair, cradling her to his chest.
Hello, Odessa.
Hello, Xavier. I should have been glad to see my husband, to know he was here and safe. Except there was a sinking feeling in my stomach, a wave of self-loathing. I wished I was excited to see Xavier, but I wasn't. No, I was longing to see another man, and I hated myself for missing the guardian. I joined them at the door, ready to see myself out. I'll leave you alone. But Xavier stopped me with a sideways glance.
Your hair is different.
Oh,
It's red.
Evie declared the obvious, and before I could explain, she did it for me.
She had to dye it all the time, too, because Margot, that's her stepmother, said the brown was better suited for her coloring. But I think Margot was wrong, and the red is a lot prettier. Especially with her eyes. Aren't they bright? You can't even see her starbursts.
I didn't have a starburst, but when Evie had assumed mine was simply disguised, I hadn't made the correction. I didn't want to explain that I was different. I wouldn't have answers for her inevitable questions. Xavier smiled at his daughter.
I think the red is prettier too. Sounds like you both have been getting to know each other.
We have, I winked at Evie. You have a very curious, very lovely daughter.
Yes, I do.
He kissed her forehead, then studied her face.
You've changed since I've been away. You've grown 3 more freckles.
5,
she corrected. He hummed.
I suppose I'll need to do a thorough count.
Evie beamed, running her hands over his face, like she wanted to make sure he was really there.
Want to see the kittens?
I would love nothing more.
Xavier touched my arm before I could leave.
Join us for dinner tonight.
Of course. I waved to Evie, then weaved through the house, making my way out the front door and upstairs. Those books wouldn't read themselves. Except when I reached the walkway on the 2nd floor, my feet stopped. The guardian stood outside my door, casually leaning against the wall. His eyes were emerald green. His hair was damp at the ends and in need of a trim. His clothes were clean, and if he'd found any trouble, he'd washed it away, along with his beard. His face was clean-shaven, and I'd never seen such a chiseled jaw, the corners as sharp as my knives. God, he looked gorgeous. With or without the beard, I didn't care. He was here, and he was safe. He might be the guardian, but that didn't stop me from worrying. Hi. My voice, damn it, was too breathy. He pushed off the building, walking closer as he tossed a sheathed sword my way. I went to catch it, but it slipped out of my fingers and clattered at my feet. Oops. He cast his eyes skyward.
Oda, save me.
Well, I didn't know you were going to throw it at me. I picked it up, letting my hair cover the blush of my cheeks. What is this for?
My queen demanded a sword.
So he'd brought me one. He hadn't forgotten. He walked past me, his arm brushing mine.
Let's go.
Where? I asked, even as I spun to follow him down the stairs.
Someone has to train you to use it.
The idea of training shouldn't have given me butterflies, but they fluttered in my belly regardless, even when they shouldn't. 34. The sword he'd given me was elegant, yet simple, exactly what I would have chosen for myself. The weapons that May collected were embellished with fancy flourishes and inlaid with jewels. I didn't want or need an extravagant sword. The steel blade was so smooth and clean I could see my own reflection in its edge. The pommel and crossguard were gold. The grip was black and narrow to fit the size of my hand. I spent a week learning how to wield it. A week scrambling around Elder's training center, dodging blows and falling on my ass. A week earning the Guardian's frowns and scowls and grumbled critiques. It was the best week I'd had in a long time. Every muscle in my body ached. As soon as one bruise faded, another bloomed. Even my hair hurt from where he'd yanked too hard on my braid yesterday to teach me a lesson. Cut it or keep it out of the way. I was not cutting my hair. So today for training, I'd pinned the braid in a twist at my nape. We'd been at it for nearly 2 hours and not a single pin had stayed in place. I flicked the sloppy blade over my shoulder as I faced the Guardian and readied for his next attack.
For the love of Mac, would you fucking relax, Cross? Breathe before you pass out.
He mentioned the god of war often. Not really a surprise. I bet they were good friends. I tightened the grip on my sword's hilt. I am relaxed and breathing.
Then tell your shoulders to climb down from your ears.
My shoulders dropped. Happy now?
I'll be happy if you keep me from drawing blood.
He lifted his sword, eyebrows raised.
Ready?
No. Was anyone ever ready to fight the Guardian? Yes. He came at me with a strike to my ribs. I deflected, barely, and took a quick sidestep to my left. Then the blows came one after another, pushing me around the ring until we'd moved through the whole circle. I managed to block each of his strikes, which meant the last would be so fast I wouldn't even see it coming. A silver streak. It flashed in my periphery, and I moved too late. His sword stopped at my throat, the blade only a hair's width from my skin. My heart thundered, and my chest heaved with every breath. But I kept my neck taut, not wanting to feel that razor-sharp tip dig into my flesh. The Guardian's hazel eyes were hard as he stared down the length of his sword. Those eyes were always hazel when he trained. But as his gaze dropped to my mouth, the color shifted, slowly, like clouds overtaking a clear sky. The gold and chocolate speckles became smaller and smaller as brilliant bold green filled his irises. His tongue darted out, licking his bottom lip, and the dip in my belly was instant. Heat blossomed in my core, desire pooling between my thighs. The blade was still at my throat, but it was that stare. It was the way I couldn't look away from his own soft lips that was the real danger here. I took 5 shallow breaths. 6. It was easier to pretend I didn't want him when he wasn't staring at my mouth, when I didn't let myself consider that he might want me too. The moment ended in a blink, the green in his eyes flashing back to hazel as his sword fell away.
That's all for today.
I exhaled, dropping my arms to my sides, brushing off the moment and willing that dull throb in my center to stop.
Your stamina
Is shit, I sighed. I know.
it's better.
I feigned shock. Was that? Did you just say I was improving?
Don't let it go to your head.
Never. A smile toyed on my mouth. His face had a light sheen of sweat. Every day he'd arrived clean-shaven, except today. His jaw was covered in a dusting of day-old stubble, and after one look, I'd decided instantly it was my favorite version. Then I'd tripped over my own feet. He, of course, had laughed. I noticed the soldiers work their horses out by riding the perimeter of the fence, I said. If there's a horse available, I was wondering if I could resume riding again.
So that when you sneak out of Elder, this time you do it on your own and not in a merchant's wagon.
Exactly. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze. Emerald green. My belly fluttered. I dropped my head and stared at the dirt. Every evening, I told myself to skip training the next day, to stay locked in my suite until he left Elder. And every morning, I met the Guardian at dawn. He'd told me on that horseback ride from Ashmore that the gods were vindictive, manipulative bastards. Maybe he was right. By this cruel twist of fate, I was married to Xavier while this man haunted my dreams. This was all we'd ever have together. Morning training sessions with veiled compliments and unfiltered mockery. It wasn't a friendship. But when I thought about my days in Tura, the best had been with the Guardian. Maybe that was why I couldn't seem to let him go.
What did Xavier say when you asked him to ride?
He asked. I didn't ask him. I'm asking you. It was my turn to give him a test.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.